All right, and good morning, and welcome to the Happy Hour with me. I am Eileen Cook, part of the Creative Academy, and we're here to talk craft. So first, just to start off, just a quick check-in. I'll start with you, Tony. How goes the writing this week?
I'm doing editing on the my thriller novel. I'm putting it through that pro writing aid, which is magic software, and I'm getting a contract with a publisher.
Yay! I was hoping you would share that news.
Yes.
So how went the phone call? You had your first phone call with your editor, I guess.
Well, with the publisher. So now for the rest of you on the phone, I have a Born Identity style thriller with the protagonist is a male ballet dancer. Which it's not a ballet movie, it's not a ballet novel, but the character's ballet dancer, and Eileen actually did an edit on it. But the feedback that I got from most agents was, they really liked the writing, but they thought it doesn't reach the demographic, right? Nobody's going to buy a ballet dancer as a spy thriller. And I submitted it to this one indie publisher. So I had a 2-hour meeting with her yesterday. She said, we thought about this. This was the issue, but they thought that they could sell it. And the publisher actually became the champion of the book, and said a bunch of nice things about my writing and the story and the character and everything like that. So,
yay!
So I'm waiting for a contract and to figure out whether, this is going to fit and all that stuff. But it's a small independent publisher. There's no advance. They pay royalties, kind of traditional royalties, and they help do marketing and a variety of things. So
it's good to see that book out in the world, I think.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So, is it a Canadian publisher, Tony?
No, it's called Panda Moon Publishing. It's kind of an odd. It's kind of an odd website, but they've got about 15 or 20 authors that publish through them, and they do mostly through Amazon. They do some traditional publishing, like they'll do books and things like that, but most of it is through is electronic.
Very cool.
And there's one of the acquisitions editors actually in Langley. The woman I talked to is in Austin. They've got sort of people in California and people over in the other parts of the U.S. So we'll see what happens.
And I will end up putting into our resources. I found, when Tony shared the news with me, I found some good resources on the Writers Union of Canada. They have some things you can download if you're going, for example, with a smaller publisher that has things you should be looking for in a contract, just some of those good resources that way. So I will make sure to post those. Bonnie, how goes your writing?
Well, I'm doing a lot of analyzing, and I'm working on my second main character because Eileen pointed out that there was no conflict. So I'm adding conflict.
That's me, rating on writers' parades. And Christy, how about you?
I'm channeling my anger.
Can you sounds promising?
Yeah, it's good. Well, Cynthia, I'm so glad to see you. But you don't know Tony or Bonnie, but Tony was the fellow I told you about, who was the guy who said, "Oh no, he wouldn't do that. He'd just be really mad. He'd be angry. He'd be pissed off." I'm like, okay. Yeah. So that's what I've been doing.
Tony's responsible again for speaking for men.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I just want to add to Tony's thing. I mean, how dare they say that a ballet dancer could not be a bondage? Like, is he kind of Baryshnikov-ish?
No. The issue they said it works. The problem is that the demographic that buys the book.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right. Now, if he was a ballet dancer, ex-Navy SEAL, then yeah, that would work. But
it's a rare combination to get.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
And Cynthia, welcome to Happy Hour. How goes your writing?
Hello. My writing goes well. Actually, I'm on a little retreat, a 2-month retreat, which is just focused on writing. And I'm making some really solid decisions about my way forward, which I'm really happy about.
Yay.
Yeah, and I have lots of space and time to write. So I'm doing it.
That's what you need to be doing.
That's right.
Sounds wonderful.
All right, so let's jump into some questions. So Bonnie and I were discussing just before we kind of went, Bonnie's like, whoa, okay. Before we went live, she's in the process of kind of rethinking her book. So is it better to stop and redo the outline, or is it better to start writing? I think was kind of the question.
Sure, that works.
And of course, the beauty is there is no actual right answer for that because it's different for different people. My hunch, knowing Bonnie, who has an Excel spreadsheet of her entire plot, she and Tony are like that. Don't you have an Excel spreadsheet, Tony?
Yeah, I tried a bunch of different things. Yeah, Excel works for certain things.
It's an export from Scrivener, so.
Yeah.
So the beauty is, I think for you, knowing your passion for outlining, it's going to make the most sense to change the outline first. I think it's going to otherwise drive you a little bit crazy to feel that you don't know. Other than, I think it sometimes can be freeing to give yourself permission to write without worrying about if it's going to actually go into the book. So for example, yeah, like if you're, yeah, I got folders full of that stuff.
Yeah.
But, sort of just to say like, okay, I'm thinking I want to change, the male character. So you were getting some input from other men, not just Tony, on how guys might react in different situations. Then just to sort of say like, well, I'm just going to do a journal entry from that character's point of view.
Yeah.
That can be really useful.
Yes.
One thing that I wanted to talk about, just because it came up in an edit project I was working on recently, is the difference between individual scenarios and plot. And where that's coming from is the book that I read recently was a really interesting story, but it's a set of sort of scenes. So this character gets up, she has a baby, her husband goes off to war, things are happening. There's lots of things happening, but we're not necessarily going anywhere. Right? So in terms of, I don't know if people have ever had that experience where you have a book and you realize like you could kind of put it down, and if you wandered away from it, you don't really miss it. And that is, I think, and particularly if you're writing genre fiction, people are reading for plot. This happened. My character reacted in this way, which caused this next thing to happen, which led to my character doing Y, which led to this, which led to A, which led to B, which led to C, and so on, until we're ending up at some destination. Whereas this is a series of events that are interesting events. They're certainly very well written, well described, very articulate, good descriptions, all of those kinds of things. But there's no sense for me, like, if we took out the scene where her daughter got married, so what would change in the story? And I'm not sure that necessarily anything would, because I don't have the sense that she has a goal or a purpose that is driving her forward. So I was curious with people there's sort of two things I think that's always useful to go through, which is, one, do I just have a series of events that are happening? Or are those events impacting my character? That is, because my character had this thing happen to them, did they do something different? And I think the other flaw that I'm seeing sometimes is that there are a lot of books where the character does a lot of thinking, but there's not a lot happening. So we have, something happens and then the character thinks about that for a little while, but they're not necessarily doing anything different or reacting differently. And to be clear, they do not have to make good decisions. In fact, it's often best if they're making bad decisions. So for example, I'm thinking, I'll think briefly about Tony's book, but the ballet dancer / assassin. One thing that does happen there is that the story sort of starts off. So you have two dancers. They're in the Netherlands. If I screw this up, Tony, just correct me. Two dancers. They're in Amsterdam. They're, checking out the red light district, because what else would you do when you're there? And the guy sees somebody, basically his friend has gone into like a prostitute's room.
Yeah, room.
And he sees a bunch of other guys rush in there, and he realizes his friend's in some danger. But rather than just sort of saying, okay, and then here's what happened to the friend in that room, like he then takes action. He then leaps in to sort of see what's going to happen. And again, not that that's going to go well for him. It doesn't go well. In fact, that's what ends up kind of kicking off the story. He ends up being the one who is sort of kidnapped at that point. But that happened because of what he did. So really taking some time to drill down, like, does my character have agency is the term you'll sometimes hear. And I'm writing this down because I will forget otherwise. I'm going to click to link to an article by Chuck Wendig, who's always fun to read, on character agency. And it's around the idea, like, you don't have to have a kick-ass heroine or hero who's, leaping in and saving friends or, doing some great thing, but they have to be taking action. Their actions are some degree what's driving the story. If it's a case of, oh, we have this problem, and then my brother comes in and he solves the problem and I watch him solve the problem, for the reader, that is not as interesting. Any thoughts on that?
The one thing that I've done on another story, not this ballet story, is I was reading through it and I was trying to get a sense of the moving forward of the novel. And what I came up with, and feel free to poo-poo this or try it out, is I did an outline of the novel. I sort of did kind of a narrative about the novel as if it was a fairy tale. And I changed the bad guy into an evil king, and I changed the protagonist into a prince or a princess or something. And it was really interesting kind of writing it in the sense of a fairy tale, and they found a snake in the box, and and because I got a different sense of the action sequence and actually what the theme of the story was.
Interesting. Christy, were you about to say something?
Oh, I was just thinking, holy crap, I have to change my whole story.
Happy Tuesday morning.
Yay! Sam does a whole
Yeah, beer works. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to take up drinking now, Tony. Oh my God.
Yeah, not that characters can't be thinking, and reflection is, and you will often see, action, reflection, but what are they doing? And again, not to think that their action has to be, unless of course you're writing an action adventure novel, in which case then it does have to be bigger than life action. But if you're not, their action can be that they're going to go to school and talk to the girl that they have a crush on. That they're finally going to get up the guts to ask her out. And so there's a scene. And again, they may not even get to asking her out because something may go very wrong. But because they saw something about the school dance and someone teased them about how they never have a date, they decided to take, they think about it for a little while, no guts, no glory. They decide to ask the pretty girl out. Maybe they ask her out. Maybe they don't. Maybe because he goes to ask her out, he meets someone else, and that then takes the story in a new direction. But it is the idea that your character isn't simply just an observer. Now, as soon as I say that, someone will come up with a novel. And of course, I instantly thought of one.
Always.
For example, there's always an example. And I'm trying to remember the title of it. It's by Margaret George. And it's a historical novel. And it's told by the fool, the jester, at the court of Henry VIII. So it is this observation of the court of Henry VIII that is happening. But those books are rare. Usually what it is the character themselves in some way is driving what's happening. Now that's particularly easy if you have a clearly identified goal. I want to return this ring to Mordor. because then we know there's going to be all these various things that happen as you attempt to do that. You're going to try, you're going to fail. We're going to get closer, further away from that. But it's very clear. It's somewhat harder if your character doesn't have a clearly defined goal, because sadly for them, they don't know that they're in a story. So they don't know that it would be so much easier if they had a clearly defined goal for us. But at the end of the day, you as the writer should know that the story is going somewhere, and how are the actions that they're taking getting them closer or further from that. So Christy, if your story is about Sam coming to terms with the death of his wife, how is his actions and reactions to what's happening to the Rose and around him moving him either closer to that or further away from that? Now, Bonnie, how does that impact your thoughts on your changing of your outline?
That's basically what I use the outline for, because I can see it much clearer. And, you know, looking at 300 pages is really hard to condense that. So having a sentence or two for every scene, I'm able to go, okay, that happened. Now, why did this next scene happen? Oh, and then make sure that I've incorporated that into the previous scene, the reason why that's going to happen, or why the character made a decision to go do that. And often that's the little bits that are missing from my first draft, because, you know, the world is this big and it goes into this big. And so some of those little connections and components are missing. And sometimes, in some cases, I have to delete whole chapters because, look, they just had a very nice conversation that really has nothing to do with the whole plot of the story, which is to save the dragons. And although this was nice and lovely, it's not towards that goal. So I find during my revision process, looking at the outline and tweaking those, and you can do the because of this type statements. And then and also I find that character motivations change sometimes between scenes, and sometimes those changes are in relationship and helping the plot, and sometimes those motivations are totally contradictory to that plot and send them off in a, and you're going, no, don't do that, but it makes for a good story. So okay, do that. Now how am I going to get you back on track?
And I think that's, you know, both Bonnie and then Tony are talking about really the value of revision. And that's often, I think, unfortunately, when I figure out what my story is really about. And I keep hoping that I'm going to figure out how to do that before I ever write a story. But I have.
Tell me that.
I'll let you know if I ever figure that out, but I haven't yet. But, you know, doing an exercise like trying to distill it down to a synopsis, or Tony's idea of saying, okay, well, I'm going to make this a fairy tale and try and look at the, you know, the big overarching themes in this, sometimes becomes a way of doing that and thinking through, as Bonnie says, because A happened. I think the term because is really used. Because A happened, my character is now doing fill in the blank. And if you have a scene and you don't know why they're doing that thing, maybe it needs to just be cut, or you need to figure out, is there a way for this scene to do double or triple duty? So this is a really nice scene where these two characters, you know, have this really interesting conversation, and it's funny and it's sweet, and you can see why these two characters really like each other, but really that's the only thing happening in this scene. So then it becomes, are there other things that this scene could accomplish? And then what are those things? And again, some of that might be looking at scenes ahead of it or behind it, in terms of, are there things I need to set up? Is there some backstory that maybe needs to come up between these two characters that later is going to explain why they did that? Can I change where this scene is happening? So sometimes, you know, you'll hear it at the Surrey conference, they talk a lot about, do you have too many kitchen table scenes? And that's the idea of, do you have too many scenes where people are sitting around a kitchen table or around the coffee shop having a discussion? And there's certainly nothing wrong with those scenes, because we all have them and they all exist. But is there, can you put the characters in action doing something while that conversation is happening? Because that will then increase the interest in the scene and may result in something else happening. So, what can they do? How can they be more active? Can they be trying to, rather than have two, characters talking, can they be in the middle of a baseball game? So they're out on the field and, there's balls flying around, or there's things happening, or they're building something together, or, they're engaged in some sort of activity, because of course, the more that's going on, the more the world is larger, and the more likely they are to be bumping into something or seeing something that then might impact.
I like the idea of, I don't know whether it was Hemingway or one of the other writers said that if you're in a scene like that, you got two characters and it's not going anywhere, bring another character in.
Yes.
Have somebody show up and disrupt things.
And I think, particularly when you have two characters that are getting along. So, you
don't want that.
and you can't, I have sometimes people say, but they're, I don't know what kind of conflict to put in here, because part of what I want to show is this husband and wife that are very much in love and how they're working together. And, so they don't have a conflict. Yeah. So all married people everywhere. Yeah. What can we do? So can we bring in that they're trying to have a romantic conversation, but their kids keep interrupting? And the kids, it's the conflict with the kids that are a source of issue. Or are they at a work party? If anyone who's ever been dragged to their spouse's work party knows, where suddenly you're seeing a different side of that character, or, someone else that's sort of in relation with a ship to that. So that can make a difference. Questions on that?
She's writing away.
Christy's redoing everything right now.
Yeah, I'm writing my whole
page one.
I have how many restaurant scenes?
Oh no.
How many coffee table scenes? How many? Oh my God, I love my wife so much. Crap.
One thing about, in the defense of Excel for your scenes, I've got a template that I got sort of developed. Is I've got the who's in the scene, where the setting is, and what's the what are you trying to accomplish, right? What's the conflict in the scene? If there's no conflict, if it's just exposition, can it be cut, right? So then you start to look at I've got a restaurant scene 27 times, maybe that's too many, right? Unless it's a story about a restaurant, then that's a different thing.
Then you can have as many restaurant scenes as you like.
You also can figure out what the point of each scene is. If one is to show their relationship, and one is to show a conflict in their relationship, and one is to show how they deal with their children. If there's different reasons, then you can incorporate that reason in more. And then sometimes you go, I have 3 scenes that are showing that he's really caring when they eat their meal. Well, maybe one can go, right? So if you have, or you add something small, like one person's in a rush to leave, and so they're trying to get this conversation over with, and it just changes the dynamic of the restaurant scene. Or you have it in a park.
Take them on a picnic.
Take them on a picnic.
Do you know what? I guess I agree and disagree, because I keep thinking of a play, for instance, that for 2 hours it functions on a single stage, and sometimes they're changing the decor, and sometimes they aren't, and they're still able to tell a really compelling story in that little set place. And so I, even in my first manuscript, a lot of it takes place in a bedroom even. And I always try to make entering that room seem a little bit different each time by paying attention to something different, the lighting or something in the room, an object, or, something that didn't make it like it was going into the same dreary old place every time. And I think, just to, Christy, you wouldn't want to just throw out your great scenes in the restaurant or sitting around the coffee table, because I think they're really good. I think there's a bit of play there.
Yeah. Of course. And I think too, and I wonder, maybe people can weigh in on this, because at least from my point of view, I'm thinking mine is commercial fiction, and so I kind of get, that I have to have, certain political action and things driven by sound than I do. But I think of like literary fiction, which is probably why I'm not a huge fan of a lot of it, is like it goes on and on and on about, the candle in the wind. It's like, really? So what would Chuck Wendig and Eileen Cook say about that?
And Eileen Cook.
Would blow up that candle.
Blow up the candle.
Yeah. I mean, I think Cynthia raises a really good point, which is there are no hard and fast rules, because as soon as you say like, well, you can't do that, you can think of a book that there's a thriller called The Dinner. I think his name is Woke. It's a German author. He wrote a book where the entire novel takes place over the course of one meal.
Oh.
So it's in sections. So there's like the appetizer, the main course, like it's actually set up as a menu kind of thing.
Cool.
And it's two couples that are getting together, and they're clearly talking about their kids have gotten into some trouble. And what are they going to do about that? So the book is kind of uncovering, what did these kids do? What's going on? But the book is, 350 pages over the course of one meal. Now, obviously, you're getting flashbacks and you're getting scenes that, take place outside that rest. But overall, that story is right there. So it certainly can be done. That's not the question. The question is, are you doing it because you're making a choice? And that would be probably my big take home to people, which is you can do whatever you want. You can break any rule that there is. So, there's a lot of rules that say don't open a book with a dream. Don't open a book with a character waking up first thing in the morning. Don't open a book with a character on an airplane. You'll sort of see people talk about, don't do that. And there's always a really good example of some book that sold 1,000,000,003 copies that did exactly that thing. So the question is, are you doing it because it's shorthand and it's easier to put them in the restaurant because that's where conversations happen? And so that's, an easy place to do that. Or are you making a deliberate choice about, I want this scene to happen here. And part of it is because I want to show the bedroom over and over and over because the character is changing. So their interaction with that space is changing. And you will see that happen sometimes where a character is continually returning to a particular place. And part of what we're seeing is their understanding of that space is different. So an example off the top of my head is if you have a character that, for example, is maybe an alcoholic or, part of what they're struggling with is drinking, and you have a lot of scenes with them at the bar, right? And so, they're at the Cheers bar and they're at the stool and they're chatting with their friends and, how their perception of that bar changes as their awareness of their own issue grows and their feeling of like, maybe this isn't the best place for me to always be. And then maybe there's a scene at the very end of the book, which is them outside of that bar. So that changes. So hello, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
So feel free to pop in at any time. But yeah, we're sort of talking about characters having agency in what they're doing. And I think probably the big takeaway that we're leading around to is that they're making a deliberate choice. And you as the writer are making a deliberate choice. I am putting them here because I need this certain thing to happen. This scene serves this particular purpose. But the character, and I think we talked about this last time, the character also has to have purpose. So sometimes I'll see a book, for example, where it's a mystery novel, and I'll be like, why does this scene exist? Why did the detective do this particular thing? And the person will be like, well, it's really important that the readers see that there was a notebook in the room because later the notebook is going to be the clue that solves everything. And it's like, okay, but the character doesn't know that. The character doesn't have foreshadowing to know that this is later going to become an important clue. So why are they there? Why are they looking at the desk? What purpose do they have for being in that space where they would notice that thing? And if you're really gifted, the beauty is to have the character have a reason, and then again for everyone to look back later and be like, oh, that was there all the time. I just saw it in a different way because the character led me to believe one thing. So The Sixth Sense is the prime example of that, where, you know, spoiler alert, if someone hasn't seen it, Bruce Willis is dead.
What?
There's always one person who's like, wait, what? You know, the beauty of all of that was that anyone who saw that movie, I think, automatically wanted to go back and watch it again, because you wanted to see all those scenes and realize, oh, that scene where he meets his wife at dinner and they have this very cold interaction is because she doesn't see him, right? He's not there as far as she's concerned. And you suddenly realize that all of that plays perfectly. Maybe you can do that on a rough draft. If so, kudos to you. But for me, that is stuff that I am usually layering in a second or third round revision, because I put them in that dinner table scene because I want to have it. And then later I realized, like, okay, it's got to have both purposes in order to work.
Sometimes there's a writing mentor of mine in Seattle that talks about objects in a scene. So it's not necessarily the location, but a particular object. It might be a vase or a book or a gun or a ring or something that sort of lets you determine where the character is and what the, where are they in their journey, right? Because if it's if it's something, a picture that their mother has, that's on the counter, that's a reflection back into a previous scene. So that's something else to kind of look at, what else is in the scene besides just the location.
Well, and you could take something that might have a lot of symbolism. So Christy, I'm thinking of your book. The one thing that would, come to mind right off is a wedding ring. So, in an opening scene, if he's spinning his wedding ring around, if there's a restaurant scene where someone says, you're still wearing your ring. If there's a scene where he gets livid, and he's pissed at his wife for dying too, right? So he takes off the ring and he chucks it, right? And it falls behind the dresser. And then perhaps there's a scene again at the very end where he's moving the dresser, getting the ring out, and we see him, putting it someplace where we have a sense like, okay, we're seeing his interaction with the object, as Tony was saying, as sort of a stand-in for what's going on. And Cynthia, if I'm assuming that your book is still the one that I've had a peek at,
Yes.
Objects are huge, right? Because the objects are how he interacts with his sort of grandfather. And in fact, they're used for, call it time travel, I guess, or, as this child is touching these different objects, he's getting the history of those objects, which is then unraveling the story for him. So objects become hugely important. And again, these are things where maybe you figured this out in the first draft. This is often the things that will come up in English classes where someone's like, I noticed that every time the character was doing this, there was something that was blue in the scene. And you're thinking, yes, I did that deliberately. How smart of you to find that. And then you're flipping through later and you're like, oh, there always was something blue in this thing. Maybe I was trying to hit in a tone of, reflection. But I had no idea I was doing that. So those things you sometimes can sort of go back. And we talked at one time about setting, but really remembering again that setting isn't just a description. Setting is how your character sees that space. Setting is how your character sees that object and what meaning they put on that object. And that meaning and that feeling about that object may change as they change. So, if you have a character letting go of the past, for example, there may be a lot of things around. And certainly I know people have had this experience where suddenly you're just like, I don't need this thing anymore. I was hanging on to this, whatever that is, whether it's a vase or, something that was your grandparents, like because I felt I had to, or there was a sense of obligation. But I don't have to do that. And there's something very liberating, which is why there's whole book series out now about how to, get rid of all of your shit, which is the thing. You can purge. Questions on that or comments on that?
I have an example that I'm struggling with. I have a character that I want to show his, he's a programmer, he's a uber nerd, and I want to show his gaming life. So, you know, purpose of the scene is I want to show him gaming. I also want to have some, it's a love story, so I want to have some time between the love interest, and he's trying to kind of survive until the next date, because he's so excited about this brand new love thing in his life that he's trying to fill his time, and he's just struggling with how do I not obsess about the love. And so his motivation for playing the game is just distraction. He doesn't have a big agenda. But then what I wanted to show in the scene was that he's changing, like that having this new love interest in his life has made him do the thing that he always does in a particular kind of passive way, that he's not able to do that anymore. But it was interesting because a friend said to me, well, what's his motivation in the scene? And I was like, well, he's just trying to kill time, which doesn't feel like a very strong motivation for the scene. But it's sort of like, well, maybe I need to dig a little deeper and come up with something a little bit stronger. I don't know.
Can I say something?
Yes, I love that you raised your hand, Cynthia.
I know.
So I was like,
I'm the mother of a gamer, so.
Oh, great. Okay, awesome.
So while I was listening
I'm a
to
father of a gainer too.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I have a 22-year-old who is really into games, and he and his friends go to gaming cafes, and when he's home, he's always been, since he started in his late teens, into games. And as I was listening to you talk about falling in love, I thought, you know what, for him, it would only happen through the gaming process. If he met somebody through gaming that he took an interest in, only then I think would he start to sort of move away. But I would think if a gamer wouldn't be gaming to waste time, because for them it's not a squandering kind of activity. They're totally engaged, and they watch other people play games. I mean, they are.
That's the stupidest thing too I've seen.
Millions of people do it. I can't get my head around it, but he's not a bad person. He's got good social skills, but it's like that. He loves that. That's his hobby. And so when I heard you say that he was just wasting time with gaming, I thought, well, that wouldn't fit really with the gamer's personality, because
Right.
they would never consider it wasting time. And I think a love interest, to find one outside of that, gaming is difficult, because the love interest probably wouldn't understand the attraction to the gaming and would be maybe put off by it, because it seems really antisocial for a lot of people.
Right.
He'd have to have his computer taken away, and he'd have no other choice.
Yeah.
And then realize that there's sun outside and air and grass.
So anyway, for whatever it's worth, I just thought that I would share that with
that's
you.
interesting. Yeah. And I guess, so what do you see for your son? Like, do you see him, like, is it the strategy? Is he attracted to the teamwork or the strategy, or do you know what is in there that is the juicy bit for him?
Well, it's really layered, actually. I think he's a super smart kid. He does a lot of math in his head, and he's thinking about strategy. He's got really good spatial awareness skills. And so I think in a gaming environment, which is virtual, that seems to give him an advantage. So I think he can kind of see what other people are going to do before they do it.
It's a huge community thing too, right?
Yeah.
That he's like, it's not just you're playing by yourself, you're playing with these other people. You know, it's the strategy. It's like, golf or, watching sports or whatever, right? Except you're able to you're able to do things that you can't do in normal life.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting. My son's 19. He's in college for the first year. We got him a laptop, but the laptop's not powerful enough to play the games. So he's now incredibly social. He's in residence. He's playing a couple games, but they're really small. And his whole sort of social life has changed because he hasn't got his big, computer that can heat the house that he normally has. So.
Yeah.
Bonnie, you had a thought.
Yeah, because my son's a big gamer as well. But And
Little
he's
did
right
Michelle
now
know she was going to find this like horde of gaming people.
trying
The gamers.
to date.
Yeah.
He's trying to date. So he's been asking this girl out. And he comes home and he is so stressed about whether or not she's going to respond to his text that he has to go into his games to relieve himself and find comfort and just like disconnect from the real world, which is really stressful. And, you know, his gaming world is comfortable and safe and he could do whatever he wants there. And yeah, there's the community because there's always someone to chat with. And so it's more of an escape from the stress of the relationship problem. So you could use that in your...
Yes, that's totally fitting, actually. Yeah.
The other thing is to think about whether or not you have two different scenarios. So you have a scene maybe earlier where he's gaming and we see that this is his world and he's super comfortable and he is, you know, maybe he's Cynthia's son. So he's, you know, 4 steps ahead of the rest of his team. And they're all like, you're the best to lead this ninja, you know, mission to Mars or whatever game it is.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Ninja to Mars.
That
It
one
can
would
happen.
be very popular.
Yes, I'm going to have a second career writing games. But so you have, you know, that scene, and then we see a scene where maybe he's making some mistakes because some part of him is thinking about her. So he notices, you know, something in the game is, you know, that character has the same color eyes as hers, but hers were more blue. And then one of his friends is like, dude, you missed the dragon. We'll bring in Bonnie's dragons. This bad thing happened, you know, and it's like all of a sudden he's maybe, and so we see that maybe the real world is interfering with his world.
Right.
That may be an interesting...
Well, the other layer of it is that it's, I write gay romance. So he's a character who has been mostly closeted. And there's a lot of homophobia in the gaming world. It's like, certain games can be really macho. So he's kind of just sort of flown under the radar and not mentioned it. And then as his first real romance starts to blossom, he decides that he can't just sit back and listen to abuse anymore. So that's what's happening in the scene. And I wasn't sure, like, it's such a little pod outside of the bigger story. So I'm not sure whether to try to like weave it in better by having more scenes, or if that just sort of adds to the like, let's get back to the romance. That's always the romance thing, right? It's like people are so focused on the romance that everything has to kind of serve that. So and I think that this scene does, but I'm not sure that others sort of setup scenes would. I think they might just be kind of like, okay, but so what? Like, why are we here? You know?
Yeah. And it might be that it's just the very end of that scene. So you're opening as he's finishing a game. And
Yes.
discussion has happened about what he did. And so we have this sense of how amazing he is at that particular activity.
Right. Or there's sort of like his internal monologue of like, well, normally I would just do this, but now I just can't seem to do that or whatever. So
It's a huge...
It's so interesting though. I have kids, but I do have a niece who's now in her 40s who's avid gamer since, little. And now she's a lead at one of the animation firms. And in fact, Black Panther she worked on.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But even now in her 40s, and she's single, and she said, yeah, like the gaming community is this community. But she said, now I'm a woman in my 40s, and there's all these young guys, primarily, there are some women, in their 20s who predominate gaming land. But she met her first and very long time love, who lived in Australia. She lived here. And so she moved to Australia through the gaming community. Yeah. So I'm wondering, it might be very cool to have an online romance where his avatar is something and very different than what he is in real life.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my niece said that happens all the time. And then she said we were lucky with some of our communities. We actually all kind of lived close by, and so we could actually meet each other, and it was really fascinating to see who these people really were. But she said it was scary because we're used to being like these other people online. So that might be something to play with too.
That could work into my book too.
Yeah. The big takeaway that I, as we were listening was Cynthia's comment around, he wouldn't be doing this to waste time. When you're thinking about motivation and purpose, like this is what he does, that this isn't something,
Gives them comfort.
yeah, like it's more than just like surfing through Facebook to see what everybody's on because you got 20 minutes and there's no point in trying to do something else. It's more than that for him.
Right.
So he's,
Much greater engagement.
yeah, but it's not even just, to some degree it can still be like, it's, an activity he's trying to do to kind of, enjoy himself or whatever, but that it is, it's not just a time thing. And that just might be a tiny shift in how he thinks about that.
Right. Yeah.
Might make that difference.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Sure. Other thoughts or questions? All right. Well, the other thing I wanted to put in people's heads, just because it's come up as I was reading certain things this week on other people's work, is thinking about people's emotional reaction to stuff. Where do you have that kind of emotional beat in your book where if something happens, instead of saying, I feel scared, or I felt scared when I saw this happen, how can you show that? Like, what is the physical manifestation of that? What is it that they do differently? Where does that show up? And I may have mentioned it here before, but the emotional thesaurus, if people have that, can be a really useful kind of thing to think about. But there are some people who say anytime you have the word I felt, that you should take it out and put in an actual description. So instead of saying I felt scared, you have to come up with some way to describe that. Or I felt he didn't respect me. How would your character describe that? What does that feel like for them? Which is easier said than done. I am one of those people where sometimes people will say, well, I can't tell anything because I know we're supposed to show, not tell. I do think there's a point where sometimes you just need to tell what's going on and then move on, right? But I do think there's a lot of value in saying, that may not be the case all the time. And, kind of sort of slowing up and saying what's going on, particularly if you're contrasting that with something that they do. So if your character is really scared, but they are taking an action, going full circle back to our thing where they're going to do something that would be not congruent with being scared, that's interesting to me. Are they feeling one thing, but do they say something else? And then are they kicking themselves inside for how they're reacting, or do they feel really good about how they're reacting? Because again, we are not easy creatures, the human type, and I imagine dragons are no more easy, Bonnie, although I'll leave that up to you to say for sure. But most of us aren't saying what we're thinking and feeling. Most of us don't even know all the time what we're thinking and feeling. So that allows you to play with that. And I think sometimes when we write, I felt scared, we're giving our character a lot of credit that they actually know what they're thinking, which they may not know. So that is a way to sort of play with that.
But you can have a body reaction though. You may not think
Yes.
what's going on, but you may, your heart may be palpitating or you're sweating or whatever, but especially a guy, we have no idea what we're thinking.
It's all body. Huh?
Yeah.
And then you just punch something and you feel better.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
It all builds up and then you punch something. And
Yeah, exactly.
I do think there is that element of, we often confuse emotions. So fear and rage are really closely tied together, particularly for guys. We do know that, oftentimes they'll sort of react as a way of sort of dealing with that emotion. So, thinking about, what is it your character feels, and do they know that they feel it? So if you're doing your Excel spreadsheet, those of you who are this, like, how in tune is your character with what's happening? Do they think they're trying to do one thing, but they're trying to do something else? So you're writing a book about, a character who's a little socially awkward, but in love with someone. And they tell themselves, like, as far as they're concerned, the purpose of this scene is that I'm going to buy a birthday gift at the gaming store for a friend of mine. But we as the reader can see, like, you're really there because you want to flirt with the person who's working at the game. Like, but maybe you're not even willing to admit that to yourself. And I think certainly when writing any kind of romance, there is that kind of thing where I don't know if people aren't necessarily aware. I was recently reading a book, and for life of me, I can't remember the name of it, but it's about a married guy who begins and enters into an affair. And it's quite clear to me as the reader, that's where that was going. But I think it was interesting to see how the writer kind of had the machinations in his head, where from his perspective, it was just, an interesting conversation. And it was just these sort of things, and the things he sort of said and did to sort of, I don't know if I want to say make that okay, but sort of understand his own behavior, and to the point where I don't want to say that he would have described it as like she started things, but I don't think he saw it as his role in that at all. And I thought that was particularly well done because, whoops, I just accidentally kissed her.
Yeah.
So that happens.
I don't know what happened.
Came out of nowhere.
Yeah. But I do think, to be honest, I think, for example, a lot of infidelity does happen that way. And I think a lot of romance happens where, there are definite people who might be pursuing and, going after things. But I think a lot of times it's like, by the time I caught up with what I was feeling, I was already feeling something that was fairly strong. And then what do you do with that feeling? So thinking about the emotionality in your scenes, about, what's your character thinking, feeling, reacting, again, because I'm going to go full circle, like make sure that your character has a reaction, is not just an observer to what is happening, but they are then choosing to do something or choosing not to do something. That's also an action. I want to make sure I stress again, like they don't have to be the action adventure hero, but they do something. They react in some way. They say something. They choose not to go someplace because of their belief about that event. All right. Does everybody have a good writing goal for the next week? Something that you're going to work on?
Yep.
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 Can I ask you a
Yes.
question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Before you all go off to your respective endeavors, I am beginning work on a thriller, and I would really love some resources or really good examples that you may have read in that.
Adult thriller or YA?
No, it's adult.
Adult thriller. Oh, I can think of a lot for you.
Yeah, me
I happen
too.
to be a big fan of. So when you say thriller, can you tell me a little bit more? Like, are you thinking more like psychological thriller, or are you thinking like action adventure thriller?
It's action for sure. It's a murder. Starts off with a murder.
Yay.
Yeah. Murder on the Nordic Trail. But it's but the reason for the murder and who did the murder, who was involved in the murder comes out over the course of the story of this woman's recovery. She dies, but then she comes back to life.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So recently a book that's gotten, just in terms of a lot of press and a lot of success, it's called The Woman in the Window.
Okay.
It's kind of a retelling of Rear Window by Alfred Hitchcock. A
That's
little
the
bit of
movie. It made a movie, right? Is that the one?
that. The Girl in the Window or Rear Window?
No, The Girl in the Window. Is that
It sold in 35 countries. They sold it for, I think it was $4 or $5 million. That book sold for. I mean, I think it's really good. I'm not sure if I thought it was like that spectacular, but I did think it was a really nice thriller. And it is that kind of thing where it's a little interesting and there's a murder, but you're not actually sure if there was a murder or if the main character is possibly not a very reliable narrator. But I can come up with a long list for you because thrillers are my favorite.
Yeah. With you.
I can always kill off somebody and enjoy that. But Tony, you may have some also good kind of action adventure thrillers.
Yeah, I like any of the Lee Child
Yeah.
novels. I like Michael Connelly. Actually, what I really like is The Lincoln Lawyer. Now, this may not be. This is
Yeah.
um, the book. The movie was good. The books are actually really good because it's all first person. What I like to do is, depending on whether I'm doing first person or third person, is try and find a book that has a voice. So The Lincoln Lawyer is very much first person. A lot of times Lee Child is first person. So those are worthwhile. And for just something that moves forward, just even like the Da Vinci Quest. Now, what was it?
Code.
The Da Vinci Code. Thank you. Moves so fast. You may or may not like his writing, but it's kind of breakneck speed if you're going for that that kind of thing.
Also, the author Linwood Barclay, he writes a lot of interesting thrillers around the idea of sort of an ordinary person thrust into extraordinary circumstances. So, for example, and he used this as an example because I saw him speak once. And he talked about the fact that it drives him crazy. He goes grocery shopping with his wife, and that she'll put her purse in the kind of little basket at the front of the shopping cart, and then she'll go and get something off the shelf. And it drives him crazy because she shouldn't do that kind of thing. So once he was going to teach her a lesson, so he went to get the cereal, he came back, he saw her purse in the cart, and so he took her purse and hid it. And he gets outside to the car or whatever, and then she comes in and she puts down her purse, and he realizes he's actually stolen the purse from some other woman in the grocery store.
That's great.
Well, you taught someone else a lesson.
Yeah, so you had to, basically go in and sort of be, like, oh, my bad. Just a valuable lesson, I think, for men everywhere, that trying to teach your wife a lesson is never a good idea.
Yeah, true. Yes, true enough.
But he actually spun it into a book around a character who basically similar kind of thing is trying to teach his wife something and picks up a purse, and then the purse has some, like, I can't remember exactly, it was a murder weapon or something in it, and now he's then thrust into this situation. I'm pretty sure he's the one who also did one where a guy and his wife go to an amusement park, their little kid wanders off, they split up to go and find their kid, and then his wife is now also missing, and then she doesn't show up on the camera, and it becomes this question of who was his wife, and clearly she was lying about her identity the whole time. So he does a lot of interesting, I think, ordinary people who suddenly find themselves thrust into sort of these extraordinary circumstances.
He's out of Toronto too. He was a Toronto Star writer at one point.
Let's hear it for the Canadians.
Yay.
I'm not a thriller lover. I mean, I like Agatha Christie, like that's as thriller as I go, or like Alfred Hitchcock. Yeah, I don't like all the. Yeah, I get too scared. But my a few of my friends, my neighbor included, and my gaming niece, loved I See You, and it's kind of Girl on a Train-ish, kind of, but it happens on transit, and just this kind of progression of murders, or are they murders? And Elise said it was really good, but she doesn't take transit now.
It's like people who can't swim after seeing Jaws.
Right?
Yeah, or the shower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little psycho scene. Yeah.
Yeah.
No more showering.
Yeah, it's not good when you get away from basic hygiene.
Exactly. And I have a feeling that the bad guy in it is a gamer. So, like.
So, Michelle, if you decide to take your romance from a gay erotic romance, you could suddenly make it into a gay erotic thriller.
Yeah.
And he's a serial killer. So you can just add that little wrinkle. All right. So what I will do is I will download this video later and post it, and I will put links to Chuck Wendig's article on character agency, and I also will include that link to the Writers Union publication. So if anyone else has good news, as Tony did, who is signing a contract, yay, Tony.
Yay.
You can take a look. They have some good things. And the Writers Union is something people may consider if they want to join. You do get some interesting benefits, so I will post that information. Any last questions? All right, everybody, get writing.
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Bye.